It's the 75th anniversary of the world's biggest military alliance. Heads of state of NATO countries are in Washington, D.C. to mark the three-day event. The summit seeks to reassure Ukraine of NATO's support while offering some hope to its war-weary citizens. The summit also comes amid China's growing assertiveness in the Indo-Pacific region. The alliance is facing one of the biggest challenges in spite of member countries pledging billions of dollars and delivering key military aid. The Russian military is making considerable advances in Ukraine. The latest airstrikes across Ukraine, including a children's hospital, has resulted in more than 41 civilian casualties. Blaming Kyiv for the hospital attack, Russia claimed that an air defense missile was improperly used, accusing it of setting the stage for Zelensky's participation in the NATO summit. With the war in its third year, pressure is now mounting on NATO members in spite of imposing severe sanctions on Russia over its aggression in Ukraine. The country has been upgraded from an upper middle income country to a high income country by the World Bank, indicating its resilience in the face of Western sanctions. Ahead of the NATO summit, NATO chief called out Iran, North Korea and China for supporting and enabling Russia's illegal war of aggression against Ukraine. He also hoped that NATO members would continue to aid Ukraine's war effort. His comments invited strong criticism from China.
We urge NATO to correct its wrong perception of China, abandon the Cold War mentality and zero-sum game, stop selling security anxiety, stop creating imaginary enemies all over, and refrain from forming small groupings under the banner of mutual defense, and instead do something tangible to promote world peace, stability and development.
Meanwhile, US President Joe Biden is all set to host the celebratory Alliance Summit in Washington, D.C., where leaders and representatives of member nations, in addition to those vulnerable to Russian aggression, such as Moldova, Georgia and Bosnia, are attending the meeting. The summit also comes at a time when Biden is facing a tough re-election campaign at home and Europe is facing a rise of the far-right populism. While pressure is on Biden to convince his allies that he can still lead, NATO is faced with the prospects of its future if skeptic Donald Trump comes to power in November. Before flying from Berlin to Washington, D.C. to attend the NATO summit, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz says he had no concerns about the state of US President Joe Biden's health.
No, I don't have any concern. From the many conversations I've had with the American president, I know that he has prepared this summit very well and very precisely together with us. Many of the decisions that are now being taken and prepared there have been developed in close consultation between Germany and the US. In this respect, this will also be a very successful summit.
Let's now talk to our correspondent Susan Tehran, who is joining us live from New York. Hi, Susan. What are some of the preparations being made in Washington, D.C. ahead of this NATO summit? And we also understand that the politics in America is not really concerned about what will be discussed about Ukraine at the summit, but about Biden.
Yeah, who would have thought that this summit to save NATO would turn into really a fanfare and media frenzy to watch to see if President Biden can really save himself. On the one hand, as you mentioned, you have the domestic politics. All eyes are on the 81-year-old president that's older than NATO itself. We should say whether or not he'll have any gaffes, is he going to fall asleep, all of the things that we've been talking about and the concerns that many in his own party have. But on the other hand, as you mentioned, you have the issue of Ukraine. The thing that Americans are most concerned about is that this summit is happening at a time when there is no talk for peace between Russia and Ukraine. This is a summit that will ultimately come to the conclusion that their war has to continue until some kind of victory by Ukraine, despite the fact that, Russia is making advances. And the checkbook is in Joe Biden's hands. So that's a cause of concern for a lot of Americans as well. Ukraine is really not on the top of their agenda of spending issues. So there are a lot of issues at stake on the one hand. I just really quickly want to say it was really interesting that Olaf Scholz made those comments. We had a very revealing report in the Wall Street Journal last night that said Olaf Scholz wanted to cater to President Biden when he was visiting Germany. So he put his meeting with Biden very early in the afternoon and not late in the evening for dinner because Biden couldn't attend, but was again surprised that Anthony Blinken showed up instead of Joe Biden. And Biden's team said that Joe Biden couldn't come because he had to go to sleep. So I just thought that was interesting that Olaf Scholz is still not concerned.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.